As a writer and a producer, one of the things that I feel like a lot of writers are not taught early on is that they spend a lot of time on craft. And there's nothing wrong with that. You should spend a lot of time on craft. But one of the things that I think happens to writers, it happened to me, is that we spend so much time on craft that you forget that your craft is going to be applied to an audience at some point in time. And when I was involved in the tech startup industry, you started from the ground floor going, I need customers tomorrow. And so therefore I'm building a product for my customers. And there's all these little techniques that they use to do that I've now brought into my writing career and found extremely helpful. So I want to try and get at like how we, the three of us, have in the past gone after this idea of finding an audience. So question for you, I'll start with you, Anastasia, on this one. When it comes to finding an audience, what part of the process should storytellers start to think about their audience? So, I know a lot of storytellers just jump into the story and just start writing because they're inspired. But really, at what point in the storytelling process should a writer or producer actually, start to think about like, where does my audience fit in here? What do you think about that?
I mean, I start thinking about it like second draft kind of as I'm going through, because at first I'm writing for me, right? Because I've been inspired by something. I'm producing something for me and I think it's interesting and I think it's, I would buy it, right? And then you start like looking over your project and you start thinking about the niches that you can fill and maybe where you can pump up that aspect of it. I love theme. I'm a big themer. I think it comes from like the times I did PR for a lot of stuff. So I love jumping on the theme bandwagon because I think it really shows your audience what you're gonna get, right? And it beats that like I'm gonna nerd out over this situation kind of thing. So I do find like trying to pump up those elements pretty early on. I mean, sometimes I'm not going to lie, when I'm writing the first draft, I think, well, that could be marketable, but for that, but yeah, I'm pretty early on. I'm thinking about the audience, and maybe that's just because I'm a people pleaser.
Yeah. You said a couple things that I really like that I want to come back to in a second. But Grant, what about you? What part of the storytelling process are you generally tending to start to think about your audience?
I agree, and I think Anastasia hit a couple really great points that you mentioned you want to address. I really like that second draft idea. I think that's there's some liberation there, because I feel like if you get too calculating and you don't let yourself dream at the onset, it can feel kind of clinical, or you can get into that area where you feel like you're kind of doing storytelling by committee. You're just trying to hit this group, that group. Yeah. Like, I don't think anyone gets really excited about like an idea and the first thing that comes to their mind is, let's make this a 4-quadrant idea. like let's tell this story and we're going to hit every demographic. I do think that it can be helpful to just ask yourself near the beginning, like, who is this for?
Yeah.
Because our content is more niche than ever across multiple platforms. I mean, there's some very specific stuff out there. We know this. It's a buyer's market for content. I do think that it's helpful to frame pretty early and say, like who, all signs are pointing to this is my audience member. Who is this for? Do I have an idea? Don't get stuck on that. Don't get limited. But I think it's helpful to understand kind of based on your vertical or based on your genre or based on your perspective as a storyteller, who's going to be your bread and butter, like who's going to be there on opening day. And then work with that kind of foundationally. And like you said, you can take that idea and in drafts 2 and 3 and 4, and you can take it, plus it, minus it, make it more or less family friendly, more specific to genre nerds. Yeah, I think because not everything is for everyone.
Right.
And I think that's okay.
Right.
I think to piggyback off of what you were saying is like early on when I was a writer, I took everything really seriously, like every conflict or every time somebody like was like, oh, that's not my jam, I took it so personal and I wanted to adjust to them and make it for them. And I think it was a few years ago when I was writing something about being biracial and being, in LA and being light skinned and all this. And half of my friends were like, well, this makes me feel really guilty. And the other half of my friends were like, this is awesome. I was like taking it so personally. And somebody said, know your audience. They're not the ones that are going to watch. It's fine. And it really, it changed things for me because not everyone's going to watch. I don't watch everything. So to expect everybody to watch your stuff is a little bit egotistical. I'm not even egotistical. Right. It's unrealistic. So right. I love that you were talking about that because I was just like, yeah, and also made me feel less hurt by things.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point. Like, if you start like in the commercial acting world, they say, just kind of throw that copy away, be supernatural in a commercial audition. Just say it like you're saying it to your best friend. Picture the person that you're talking to. And when you can picture that person, it grounds the performance in reality. It makes it more natural. And I think that can be a helpful exercise for storytellers as well. Don't write your whole, season or multiple season show for one person only. But if you can think of an audience member and try to make it real and honest, it really kind of grounds that in truth. And I think people can smell that a mile away. If it feels overwrought or if it feels written to hit the middle and then it hits no one. I do think understanding a person that might like it is helpful.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that there's two concepts I really want to pick up on because they're part of what I was taking away from my tech startup experience. And it was relative to something that each of you said. So Anastasia, you said your first audience is yourself. And I think that that's really important for writers, especially to get a grasp on and for producers to understand. And when I talk about writers and producers, usually I'm the same person. Like, right, I'm writing it and I'm producing it. But if you're going to work with a producer, I think they've got to understand that too, is that we take, we are, as a whole person, we are so involved in so many different aspects of life. It's why so many of us are so unique. And that's really great. It's a really awesome thing. And you're taking that uniqueness and you're saying, like, this is really important to me. And it's really important to me because of these various things I've got going on in my life and in my life experience. And then it's saying, so the first draft, I totally agree, is like for yourself. It's like, because in this tech startup world, that's what they would tell you, like, build the product for yourself. If you're the one with the problem that needs to be solved, then it's much easier for you to build something that meets that problem in a way that you enjoy. It delights you that it solves that problem for you. Otherwise, you're going into it going, that's a problem that I'm trying to solve, but it's not my problem. And so then you don't put the same amount of care into it, and you don't understand the same inputs and outputs that are occurring as you interact with the product itself. So I love that concept of saying, Anastasia, you said the first draft is for me, and then I start to look for the audience after that. And then you said something, Grant, that I think is really important, and that's that the other thing that they tell startup founders, and again, this is for people who are early on. So if you're a writer producer and you're listening to this and like you already have several Netflix series going on, like, this is not necessarily advice for you. But the other thing too is that you are looking for a niche. You're not looking for the mass market. You're looking for a niche.
Right.
And I think it's really important that writers and producers acknowledge that early on. If you're big enough that you're going for the mass market, you have a completely different set of concerns. And it's not to say that your project won't break into the mass market at some point in time, but you are writing for a niche at first, for sure, in my opinion. So I just love that you guys both brought those things up.